welcome to this meeting of the Badenoch and Strathspey Area Committee. This meeting is not being broadcast live, but will be uploaded to the Highland Council website and available for public viewing for 12 months thereafter. You all have a copy of the meeting protocol, but basically to run over a few quick details. Please keep your microphone muted, except when you're speaking, and use the electronic hand facility if you wish to attract attention or you wish to speak. And please do not use the meeting chat facility, as it will not be monitored. So we have no apologies for absence. Lorena, are there any declarations of interest?
None received so far, Chair.
Members, are there any other declarations? Okay, no declarations of interest. So move now to item 3, and I have a pleasure in welcoming Paul Senior, who's the Executive Chief Officer for Education and Learning. So Paul, if you're available, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members, and thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to attend this meeting to meet with you all. During week 6 in my Highland assignment, not that I'm counting, but I'm pleased to be able to meet you all as a committee in this forum so early during my time with the authority. So in recent years, as a local government inspector and national government advisor, I've had the good fortune to meet with your equivalents in a number of authorities across the UK. So I do have an obsession with benchmarking, comparing and contrasting. And as I say, it's really good to be here today to meet with you all. So my update today follows recent member briefings with a focus on schools reopening and also last week's Education Committee. So hopefully, in terms of the message, won't change too much, but important to give you as much timely information as possible. I'd like to formally thank you all for your collective support received today, and I've received lots of positive emails, so thank you all. And also the positive recognition of the efforts of our colleagues, not just in schools and settings, but also council services in terms of IT, transport, catering, ELC, facilities, cleaning. When we talk about the whole ecosystem that comes together to make sure that our children and young people can have their needs met in learning, is a considerable system. And unfortunately, some folk, I'm maybe not so sure some in this group, but we keep hearing about the folk in schools and settings, and we've got to thank our teaching staff. But as I say, I'm keen that we recognise that there's a whole system that comes together to make sure that our schools and settings for August will be ready. So, as previously referenced, we've been working with an option A to C approach in getting our schools and settings ready. We've recently had national determination now that the primary focus should be on option A, which is the 100% return in August with no social distancing measures. So our services, as well as our schools and settings, have been fixated on that now in terms of making sure the conditions are right for learners to return, all learners to return in August. We've also done contingency planning as it's incumbent on us, which is option B, 100% return with 1 metre social distancing measures been deployed. And also the model that we were previously working on for the last 4 or 5 weeks prior to the recent government determination, which is option C, as we're now calling it, which is 50% return with social distancing measures been deployed at 2 metres. So we have to obviously factor all of these in, because who knows where the R number will be by the time we return to school in August. So as a collective, as I say, our colleagues in schools and settings and partner agencies have been keen on this. And it's a wise thing when we compare and contrast with learning from other local authorities in Scotland. And also prior to that, my role as a director in England in the London local authority and chairing and London activity with a focus on schools reopening. Our primary concern, however, remains safety and well-being for members of our community, our learners, our children, families, communities, and so forth. So risk assessments continue to be the primary determinant. We'll be governed by what the data tells us, by what the risk assessment tells us. Yes, we have a commitment to get towards that 100% figure of reopening in August. And business as usual, and getting back to normality, but we'll be governed by what the risk assessment tells us. And having the mechanisms in place, which is what we've been working on recently, to adapt and adjust the model depending on where we're at. So, since I started full-time with the organisation at the beginning of June, my officers have been engaged in a weekly programme of consultation, engagement and planning and preparation with our head teachers, with parents, carers, schools, settings, partner agencies, third sector colleagues, private sector colleagues. There's been a wealth of consultation and engagement. We won't be found wanting when it comes to consultation and engagement and ensuring that folk are involved. You know, I hear stories from other directors in other parts of the UK, how basically they've moved at pace and consultation and engagement had to be a retrofit because it was an aggressive timescale to get things done. But from the outset, one of our key design principles has been about co-production, co-design, and making sure that we're involving parents, carers, schools, and professionals in other agencies as part of the conversation. Evidence of that being my second week in post. We had a meeting with the Highland Parent Council Partnership with over 180 folk in attendance, which served as a precursor to schools having their own individual parent council partnership meetings to brief parents and carers where they were at. Hopefully you will have seen the comms that we've been improving on recently. We now have a dedicated web page with a focus on schools reopening. A frequently asked question document is on there. We've developed frequently asked question documents for colleagues in schools and settings, as well as parents. And we've also got a specialised version for special schools as well, because we recognise the specialism and the complex need of our children and young people in schools and settings. The web page, if colleagues have had sighting, provides information, advice and guidance as well, the signposting with key links as well. So I'm not saying we're perfect. We've got a lot to learn and grow. We're doing that as a collective. I'd welcome the challenge and support that this committee can provide. And if desired, I'm happy to take through the chair any key questions. Thank you.
Members, any questions? I have Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Paul. Following on from the Education Committee last week, my understanding was that there would be recruitment, particularly for head teachers over the summer, and obviously in our ward we have got some vacancies, and I would like an update on that, please. And my other question for you is regarding early years. I'm keen to know where we are, because there are some of our community schools that we can offer 1140 and others that we can't. So I think it's important that we get the message out there to the parents in our ward where we are and prospective timetable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Coburn, for your questions. Regarding ELC, I signed off on a position statement that should hopefully be circulated to parents and carers today, that'll be going out across the network. So that should hopefully be going out, which clarifies the position that yes, we still have an ambition to work towards the 1140, but obviously colleagues will realise that the statutory duty has been relaxed. And let me be clear, I'm sure colleagues will be aware of this, but as a local authority, in light of the financial implications associated with COVID-19, this local authority are in what we call the Section 114 space, which is on the verge of bankruptcy. Now, I'm not sure how many other colleagues have worked in local authorities that have been in Section 114 territory. I have, and I've been commissioned by national government to go into local authorities as part of a commissioner team to look at local authorities that are in Section 114 space. And one of the key questions I would normally have for your equivalents and executive of that local authority is that when you knew you were facing bankruptcy or on the verge of 114, what did you stop doing? And why is it you're still providing services that are discretionary and not statutory? Because in a time of being at that risk, the primary focus must be delivering the statutory and for the most vulnerable, and then considering what else can be done. So Scottish Government have relaxed for now the statutory duty to deliver 1140. It's incumbent on the local authority to consider all options, that if things aren't statutory, do we have to do it, or can we do it in a different way? So those key questions, that rigor is critical here, because if there is that loss of control, because the local authority does have to face a Section 114 notice, members, chief officers will lose control, and it will be Scottish Government determining what can be done, what the decisions will be. So that's not a threat, that's just a fact. I've worked in authorities like Birmingham and Northamptonshire in recent years who have been in that space, and it's not a healthy place to be. So if it's not statutory, the local authority have to consider what we can do with flexible resources. Now, the Scottish Government over the coming months may well revisit the 1140 agenda. And obviously at that time, it will be incumbent on the local authority to undertake that and revisit that and ensure it's deployed. But for this moment in time, it's been relaxed. And Councillor Coburn, in response to your simple question, yes, we recognise that, and there will be a communication coming out, hopefully today, from my officers. With regards to the recruitment thing, my head of HR, Anne McPherson, presented at Education Committee on Thursday, and there was due to be a communication being sent out. So if that hasn't been sent out in terms of giving an update, I do apologise, and I'll take it as an action and make sure that's communicated in due course following this meeting. But there was an update communication done with regards to the analysis, and we've had a recruitment round the last few weeks, and there has been progress. So I can't give you the specific individual detail for this ward at this juncture, but I will ensure, if it hasn't been circulated, that the report will be sent to all of our members across the region.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you very clearly.
Good, thank you. I just wanted to say that I was really heartened to hear you talking about the whole ecosystem of our teaching, recognising that the cleaners and the transport are just as important all the way up to the teaching staff, and how in reality for many of us that makes the community that we live in. And with regard to that and your mention of communication and engagement and priority towards mental health, and I understand that the new buzzword for that is well-being, it's picking up on something that's pre-COVID, and I hope you'll forgive me. It's with regard to the counselling in schools. The Scottish Government made a commitment that counsellings would be in all secondary schools by April 2020. And I do appreciate that with the COVID response, systems like that may have gone down. I just wondered, I'm aware that so I guess it's two questions. I am aware that the council provide a counselling service, which is an online service that anybody can access. And my first question was, has that been communicated to all of our staff, including the cleaners and the transport, that they have access to this mental health support system? And also, with regard to the counselling in schools, is there any scope that that would be extended or somehow furthered by the Scottish Government during this time, with this primary concern being well-being? Because these are very unusual times, and regardless of which scenario we go back under, I'm sure that many parents and children also will have huge concerns, and it would be very helpful for them to be able to speak about them. Thank you.
Councillor Hadley, thank you for your question. The issue of well-being is very much at the forefront of our thinking for our children, our young people, their families, our staff, our communities. The recent staff survey, which saw responses for about 4,700 staff out of the 9,500 workforce, was a pretty impressive response. The data from that, the anecdotal data from that, the feedback from that is gold dust to allow us to be targeted in our response with regards to how are we doing, how do we know, where are the pressure points. Obviously, mental health, well-being of our staff and our young people is important. So what I can say is that assessment of need has been crucial to inform where we need to focus our energies. But coming back to the point about well-being of young people, I was fortunate to have a conversation with the Secretary of State for Education in England last week, and looking at the figures across the 24,000 schools in England alone, whereby in terms of well-being of young people and the anxieties ahead of returning to school in September is very much at the forefront. And we have to make sure we have the mechanisms in place to assess that vulnerability and assess that need, because we don't all have to be students of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to understand that before we can get to learning and teaching, we have to address those issues that they're going to be presenting with regards to depression, anxieties, and nervousness. So I would totally agree. With regards to how well we've communicated that, I know that my area care and learning managers on their weekly program of meetings with head teachers have been checking in with heads collectively and individually as well and where there were identified pressure points individually on heads, I mean, we've endeavoured to be targeted and supportive. I had conversations with 5 head teachers in individual one-to-ones last week. And again, not just checking in professionally, but checking in personally. In terms of the services, therapeutic services going into schools, I do know that's still an ambition, and it's important that obviously come the new term, we look at all resources available to support our communities in schools and settings to remove those barriers to learning and well-being. So I can't give you a definitive, have we got 100% coverage for mental health provision and counselling provision for schools returning in August. But what I can say to you is it's part of our suite and a commitment that we will be looking at maximising that. I was a former National Challenge director years ago in England, where we had what we called the London Challenge programme, which was the biggest breakthrough in terms of raising attainment in London schools. And the survey came back from our head teachers, the 6,000 head teachers in London schools, that actually counselling and therapeutic interventions was the biggest breakthrough, and family support, the biggest breakthrough in terms of raising attainment. So years ago, 15 years ago, London's performance in the school space was pretty low. It wasn't great, it wasn't consistent. But 5 years on, the London Challenge programme, removal of the barriers to wellbeing and learning, therapeutic interventions, family support, was seen as one of the key breakthroughs that made a difference. So, Councillor Hadley, what I'm trying to say is I'm a big fan of therapeutic interventions in schools. We'll be looking at deploying it as effectively as we can. If there are resources available, rest assured, we'll be looking to make best use of that. Thank you.
Paul, as you probably know, in Badenoch and Strathspey, a huge amount of our pupils are transported by bus. Could you update us on the situation regarding bus transport and give us an indication of what the current thinking is regarding the wearing of face masks?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Love, and I agree. I think a lot of my work in other local authorities nationally and speaking to folk in other authorities, the transport issue is the one that keeps coming up, and it has an impact on rural authorities more so than urban authorities naturally. And then we get to the Highland region, and it's even more acute as a barrier to engaging. And recognise that even in the best of times, the Highland transport system is pretty maxed out in terms of what can be provided in getting our learners to school. So here we have a system that's incredibly stressed now as a result of COVID-19. We just don't have sufficient vehicles. Unless we get that 100% return with no social distancing measures, we're going to be struggling to facilitate that. So we've had to look at, I've commissioned a subgroup, I've commissioned a number of subgroups, as I've made clear, with a focus on schools reopening. And one of those is transport. And within the transport subgroup, we do have some of the transport providers, we have head teachers, we have the lead officers. So we have the brightest and the best minds on this locally, is what I'm trying to say. And they've considered a range of options, including those options are, do we consider going down the route of fuel vouchers for parents, enable parents to get to school, to get their children, young people to school? Do we look at groupings in terms of car sharing and things like that? So as well as maximising all available resources, because if we had to work to an option C criteria, which is 50%, 2 metres social distancing being maintained, the risk assessment data tells us, not just in the Highland, but across the UK, that transport will only be able to accommodate 20% of previous loading. So a coach, which previously could have accommodated 70 young people, will only be able to accommodate 14. That's maintaining social distancing. And as I said, that's not a Highland specific issue, that's a national issue. So the transport system, which potentially prior to COVID-19 was maxed out, is going to be under significant stress. So we require a number of options. But my transport subgroup will be meeting during July to continue to find some innovative solutions and flexible solutions. And as I said, the best case scenario is we return to school, Councillor Loban, in August with the need for no social distancing, then we'll be able to have the system as is. But if we have to fall back on option C, then, as I say, options such as fuel vouchers for parents and other creative solutions will have to be deployed in a suite of. But the officers will be meeting frequently throughout July to find that. And coming back on the thing around social distancing and the legislation and the determinations, I shared some information with our transport colleagues yesterday with regards to just checking in where we're at. And I was informed by our transport leads that the latest information from national government regarding the wearing of face masks and transport routes are that folk are to wear coverings. However, closed school transport routes are exempt from this ruling. The National Transport Body have been working with Scottish Government to seek further advice and clarification on this, especially in relation to school children whose home to school transport is by public transport provision. We understand that an announcement from the Scottish Government on this is expected on Thursday, and therefore we will hope this issue will be addressed then. So there's something there about the wearing of face masks and the relaxation for learners or children on transport routes as well. But we should be getting further determination on Thursday from national government regarding the wearing of face masks. So I can't give you the perfect answer with regards to if the transport system is reliant to work to option C come August. Nobody can. Plugged in with national government and conversations with my equivalent in other local authorities across the UK, this is one that if we can only use 20% of capacity on our transport on a system that's already maxed out, we're going to struggle. The system will struggle. So creative solutions, innovative solutions based on what works elsewhere will be required. Naturally, we're hoping that option A, 100% return with no social distancing measures being deployed, will be okay, then it's fine. But option C, it's going to be a barrier. I have to be candid with you.
Thank you for that, Paul. Members, are there any further questions for Paul? No, then in that case, Paul, thank you very much for your time. It's good of you to attend this morning. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Chair,
You're welcome to stay if you like.
Well, Chair, just before I go, much as I would like to stay with you guys, but just to say thank you for the mature challenge and support from the work of the committee, and I sense the passion. And education, schools reopening is obviously one of your priorities amongst many others, I'm sure at this moment in time. But I do thank you for keeping schools reopening as a primary priority and inviting me to the work of this committee. And if felt helpful, I'd welcome the opportunity to come along to further meetings to update you as a committee as well on progress.
You'd be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, members.
Members, we now move to item 4, which is a presentation by Mark Tate, who's the Chief Executive of the Cairngorm Business Partnership. We all know him, so he doesn't need any introduction. Mark, over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to come and have a chat this morning. I'm probably not going to say too much. I'm just going to talk a little about what we've been seeing, what we've been doing, what we expect to happen over the coming months, and then open up to your questions and a general conversation. As some of you have been on some of our community and councillor sessions, so you may have heard bits of this, but I will start at the beginning. Since when the crisis struck, we started with a simple strategy of stabilise, prepare, and open. And that doesn't seem like it seems like it was just yesterday, and now we are beginning to see things open up again, which is fantastic news, certainly for businesses. But the stabilise phase continues, and I know from some of the questions that were asked that were sent to me before the session that members are very aware of the massive impact that this situation continues to have on our whole economy in Badenoch and Strathspey, and that unfortunately is going to continue for quite some time. We will see a growing number of job losses and redundancies and families without income over the coming months, particularly as the furlough scheme is phased out. So the fact that we are beginning to see visitors back and businesses open their doors shouldn't disguise the amount of work that still needs to be done to support businesses in the sector. I've been invited to attend the National Tourism Recovery Task Force on behalf of Scottish Chambers of Commerce. So that has been set up to look at it's a short working life task force that's going to report with recommendations to government in September about how we can continue to support the tourism industry, particularly through the winter. Having said all of that, we have now for 2 months been working on how we reopen our communities, our economy, and the whole of the national park, and how we how we reopen in a way that gives confidence to communities, to employees and to visitors. And in our very, very early discussions 2 months ago with lots of members and with National Park Authority and others, we very soon established that we needed to open in a way that gave confidence to communities, employees and visitors, and we needed to do it and that was a deliberate order, because if we didn't give confidence to communities, then that would impact the visitor experience and potentially have a even longer term and more damaging impact on our economy. So over the last few months, we've done a lot of work with lots and lots of people to try and engage with communities, to try and engage with businesses, to engage with stakeholders. We developed a framework for communications, which we've got lots and lots of buy-in to under the hashtag Cairngorms Together. And it's a one-page framework, but an awful lot of work went into it. And from the National Park Authority to Visit Murray Speyside, to lots and lots of local businesses and ourselves, we're all using this framework, which is based around 4 simple messages. Know the guidelines, plan ahead, be flexible and be kind. And that's what we are promoting. As you know, we operate Visit Cairngorms. We have over 100,000 followers on social media. We've got an email database of 50,000. We've got a reasonable reach. For the past 3 months, we've been in sort of just tick over mode, just keeping our audience warm, very clearly giving the stay home message, but trying to keep them inspired to want to return. We undertook a visitor survey about 6 weeks ago now. We had 2,600 responses, and what was absolutely clear from that survey is that visitors will come back. Visitors, as soon as they're allowed to come, they are coming. So one of our core messages has been, visitors will come. We can't stop them coming. So let's be as prepared as possible. Let's have as much open as possible, so that we can instill that confidence in communities, employees, and visitors in returning. And it was great. Yesterday, many of our pubs opened their beer gardens in a safe and socially distanced way, and it's just great to begin to see some of that activity and life return. We launched on Friday a new website as part of Visit Cairngorms, which is a status website. It's just status.visitcairngorms.com if you've not seen it. And this is all about enabling people to plan ahead, from visitors to communities. So it's letting people know what businesses, what facilities are either open, partially open, or closed, and they can see at a glance. They can filter by area, by business type, and help people to plan their experience. We launched a video, which I hope many of you have seen, which was the Cairngorms Together We've Missed You video, which had phenomenal reach. I think over 140,000 people have seen that video now, which is great. And what was, that video had about 500 shares, and lots of those shares were by local people, because the whole point of the video was to try and make people, try and help people to feel proud proud in their community, proud of where they live. And that was really, the video was the first big test of the work that we've done to give confidence to communities. And we didn't, as I say, it's had a phenomenal reach, 150,000. It's been shared by lots and lots of local communities and on community forums. And I haven't seen one negative comment on that video from anybody to say, we've not seen some of the reaction that we've seen in other areas of Scotland. We've not seen to that video about wanting visitors to come back. And I think and that came across in we ran Zoom community engagement sessions, and actually, people who attended those sessions seemed to, everybody gets how important tourism is to our economy. I mean, the whole place has had no income now for 3 months, and people are hurting badly. So everybody gets how important tourism is, and I think there was a general appreciation about needing to reopen and needing to welcome back people, but about doing it safely. And actually, the fears that were raised on those calls were fears about litter and fears about toilets not being open, etc. So they were some of the issues that we raised. So I think there's still an awful long way to go. I think I'd like to congratulate the council. Actually, I think that, if I'm being completely honest, the council were probably a little slower than other authorities in the very early days of getting the grants up and running, but caught up really quickly and then overtook other authorities. So if we look across the 3 months as a whole, the Highland Council has performed. I think they performed extremely well in getting that money out to businesses through the operation of the grant scheme. Just last week I raised an issue with the planners about lots of sort of lodges have a clause to say they need to close for the whole of November. And I wrote to the planners last week to say, could that clause be waived for the year? And last night a press statement came out saying that has been waived until April. So a good job done by the council. We attend weekly meetings with David Hass and his team, which HIE attends. So there's good engagement. I think, going forward, if I was able to ask a question of Paul, I would have asked if getting children back to school could have a massive impact on our economy. If we're unable to get children back to school and all of the care that sits around that, at a time when the English schools will still be off, we'll still be busy with tourists, businesses are trying to recoup some of the losses. They need people to come back to work, and if people can't come back to work, then that's going to be a challenge. So what I would have asked him, if I was able, would have been, has consideration being given to moving the school to the pupils in places like Aviemore? There are big spaces in Aviemore that won't be used anytime soon for conferencing and banqueting, and it's much easier to move one teacher rather than 30 kids on a bus. So that's what I would have said. I think the council are going to have a big role to play in enforcement of COVID-19 procedures that are put in place by businesses and reviewing risk assessments, etc. So, it would be good to get some idea as to how the council is going to approach that enforcement, because there will be complaints that businesses aren't abiding by the new rules, and it would be good to understand how that enforcement is going to take place and what sort of view the councils will be taking, because a lot of onus is now on businesses to produce their risk assessments, open up their businesses in a safe way, and it would be good to just understand how those risk assessments might be challenged so that they can think about that ahead of time. So I think I'll stop there. I'm more than happy to take any questions, have a discussion. As I say, the core message, if there is one, is we're certainly not out of the woods. There are more job losses to follow, and the best that any of us can do is to support welcoming visitors back to our economy in a safe way.
Thanks, Mark. I think everyone appreciates how important tourism is to our economy in Badenoch and Strathspey. Probably more important to us than anywhere else in Scotland. So I've got Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Mark, for that run through. Just a couple of questions. I've had some complaints over the weekend about some camping and in the Granton area, and my information was that the Ranger Service doesn't cover this area. Could you just clarify that for me? I'll give you all my questions at once. You've only got 3. And you mentioned the local the survey of tourists, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I think your engagement as an authority has been great. However, I think we need to, when was your last local survey taken for locals in the park and what they're feeling? And the other thing was tied on to the camping issue. I think we need to differentiate sometimes the leisure campers that leave the rubbish and the wild campers that go up the hills and bivvy out. And I think we need to make that publicly clear, because we don't want to ban these folk. And I've done that over the years myself, is camped out up the hills. But I welcome your views.
Okay, thanks. Firstly, the rangers. I think the rangers. So Cairngorms National Park Authority have employed 7 seasonal rangers as an emergency measure to try and support existing ranger services that are in place. Those 7 rangers, of course, are spread right across the national park. 3 are in Deeside, 4 are in 4 are in Badenoch and Strathspey. But as far as I'm aware, and we do have, there's probably 3 calls a week I have with the Park Authority. So I'm reasonably informed about the ranger services. The priority has been to focus those rangers on some of the hotspot areas, and they've been largely focused on Rothy, Mercus, Glenmore area. Glenmore, I should have mentioned actually, the fact that Camping in the Forest have decided not to open their site at Glenmore could be an economic, social, and environmental disaster for all of us, and particularly for that area. So any pressure that can be brought to bear on them to change their minds would be very much appreciated. In terms of our visitor survey, our visitor survey did capture locals as well. So we undertook the survey, and the questions we asked were benchmarked against the National Park Authority survey that's undertaken every 5 years. So we have some benchmark data, and we did capture the same proportion of locals' views as we did in the visitor survey. But we've no plans to undertake any sort of local survey. I think we'd be happy to support any of the community organisations, or indeed BABS if they wanted to do that and help to spread the message. But our engagement with communities was focused on face-to-face community sessions, face-to-face, camera to camera, laptop to laptop, whatever we call it. So we've no plans to do a local survey, and I think the wild camping issue, it is a challenge. That there have been instances of people so-called wild camping over the past couple of weeks, and actually throughout the last few months they've been pretty isolated. Our job as both a Chamber of Commerce and a destination organisation really is to help people do the right thing, and we've organised a meeting on Friday with myself, Grant Moyer, and Chris Tyzo to talk about how we can begin to organise some sort of national campaign around responsible access to the countryside, because actually this is, we know from all the survey data, both ours and others, that there will be a new audience to the countryside, and actually that's a fantastic opportunity. One of the National Park Authority's aims is to encourage responsible access to the countryside. So the purpose of the meeting with Chris Tyzo is to see, well, how can we harness that opportunity and try as best we can to help people to do the right thing and the responsible thing when they access the countryside. And all of our messaging through Visit Cairngorms is basically positive reinforcement, helping people to do the right things. It's not our role to police people really as we see it. But happy to be challenged on that if people have another thought.
Thanks for that, Mark. Just 1 or 2 points. The closure of the Glenmore car park for the entire summer is a fundamental error. It's going to be really bad for business. It's also going to be extremely bad for the ecology of the area, because let's be honest, people are still going to come to Lochmorlich, and if there are no facilities open, then they will still be here. So I think it's important that we try and put as much pressure on Camping in the Forest to reopen the site if they can, and also in Forest and Land Scotland, because I think they're in favour of the site reopening, as is the Tourism Minister. So I think we need to continue to put a lot of pressure on them. But my main question is we're almost 100% tourist-based economy, and not quite, but nearly. How do we bring in businesses that from other areas that are not involved in tourism? If you look at some parts of our more populous parts of the country, there are many businesses, small and medium-sized, who are now thinking about relocating to places where they can have a better quality of life. So how do we attract those businesses to basically here in Badenoch and Strathspey?
Okay, thanks. First, just Camping in the Forest. I mean, there is huge pressure on them to reconsider their decision. I'm talking frequently to Fergus Ewing and to Simon Hodgkiss from Forestland Scotland, who are each in very frequent contact with Camping in the Forest. Unfortunately, they had a board meeting last Thursday and reaffirmed their decision. We've, the CBP have a very, very professional operator lined up to take the site on if they'd be prepared to offer a lease on the site. But at the moment, they're not even prepared to consider that. So I can only agree it is a complete disaster, and not least for the few people that live up there, and for the businesses that operate from there. The Pine Martin Bar, Lochmorlock Water Sports, very, very reliant on that site. In terms of diversification of the economy, you've probably heard me talk before about the need for a longer term economic strategy for the whole of the national park, and particularly for Badenoch and Strathspey. I need to improve the environment to encourage inward investment. The sort of ray of light is that in the Green Recovery Plan that the National Park Authority have put together, we've talked with them, and between us, we've put a line in that plan now that does explicitly state that we will, as part of the next National Park Partnership Plan, look at ways to diversify the economy and to reduce reliance on tourism, which will always be really important. But unfortunately, that comes down to other questions that I know folk were asking beforehand. It comes down to, availability of housing, availability of rented accommodation. It comes down to local facilities. It comes down to logistics, next day deliveries for businesses who want to come and invest here. Decent broadband. There are. And that's why it needs to be a long-term strategy. We need to make this place, which it's an aspirational place for people to want to come and work in, and we need to make that easier for them. And there's a whole range of things from transport, logistics, housing. I believe one of the things that could really help is if we move ahead with Ancamas more, but maybe that's a separate discussion. But something like Ancamas More at least gives the opportunity to have a 20-year vision and properly plan how we want our communities to live and work and play.
Councillor Bruce.
Thank you. I'd like to follow on from Councillor Obbins' remark about the industrial promotion in this area. Do we do any overt promotion of the area as an industrial place to settle? I mean, there's one or two nice little businesses. I came across one in Aviemore. I think it's a software house that employs 12 people, but it's trying to raise the game so that the people, the incomers or the people working here are not on basic wages, and we actually have businesses that actually have good substance attached to them. So I haven't explained that terribly well, but I think you've probably guessed what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, we haven't, and we haven't overtly promoted inward investment, or we haven't done it as a Chamber of Commerce. We're well placed to do it. I think part of the challenge is we don't have the right infrastructure to promote right now. And it's not just, we talk about a lack of affordable housing. That's not social housing. There are people I know who've moved here. They've taken jobs at £40,000 a year. They've got their family and they've been unable to find a house and they've moved away again. So it's right across the whole of the housing ladder, and the infrastructure is, we need to get the infrastructure right and then promote. and unfortunately there's no easy fixes. But as I say, at least we've got, and during this crisis, I've had lots of conversations with lots of government ministers. One with the government minister whose name I can't remember, Mari Goujon, who's responsible for the national park, and we've also had conversations on this with Fergus Ewing, with Kate Forbes, and we've explicitly said that we need more money to enable us to do the proper planning, to make sure that we can put in place the right facilities to allow a diversification of the economy. So we've started those discussions with the people who've got the pockets to fund it, and I think we have a commitment to at least do some proper research leading into the next National Park Partnership Plan, which is only a couple of years away now, but the research for that is starting now. So we've kind of not used the crisis, but the crisis, it has given us an opportunity to put down some markers to say we cannot allow this to happen again in this area, because as I said, we have a whole area, a whole set of communities with no income performance.
Thanks, Mark.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you. Just to follow on from Councillor Bruce, you mentioned obviously a 20-year vision. I think you've also highlighted that we need a short-term vision, and I know that you've in your answer to Councillor Bruce, you said that you needed funding to attract inward investment. But what can we do just now? What can you offer to attract investment without a trope of funding? Because I think we all understand that the public purse is very challenged and will continue to be challenged. And I do believe that we can get some people wanting to relocate or create some businesses because of the rurality and the quality of life in this area, and wondered if you've got a group working quietly in the background at what you can do to further that.
I think there's, unfortunately, I will come back to the fact that there's no easy fixes. I mean, you speak with, and they won't mind me quoting them because they've said so many times, Paul Eastoe and Stevie Christie at Wilderness Scotland. If they knew now what they knew when they moved to this area, they wouldn't have moved because of the lack of housing. I know another very good business in Livingston that was poised to move up here and create 30 very well paid jobs, but didn't do it in the end because of one was a lack of housing, and they were an international business that needed access to air routes, etc., and they just couldn't get the logistics support up here. We've unfortunately, I don't see, and I'm open to suggestions, I don't see any real quick fixes to diversify our economy and it doesn't necessarily mean a huge swathe of public investment. It probably means a little bit of seed funding to help us to get to get the right research, to get the right information. Developments like Ancamasmore, which is pretty much ready to go. It does need Scottish Government infrastructure funding, but that has been on the table for quite a while. So unfortunately, there are no short-term fixes that I'm aware of, and if anybody thinks of any, then all ears.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you for letting me back in. I totally appreciate what you're saying. The one thing I will make a personal comment, the convener, Councillor Robin, will cut me off if I'm inappropriate in this. But since I moved to the Highlands in 2005, affordable renting has not been achievable. So have you got any authority in the CNPA to reduce the number of bought houses that we're providing and increase the number of affordable renting? Is that one solution?
I don't think that's within the gift of Mark and the CBP. That's more that's a difficult thing for either the council or the national park to decide upon. But I don't think it's within Mark's gift. but certainly with respect to housing, if the developers built every house that they've got planning permission for in Badenoch and Strathspey, there wouldn't be a shortage of housing.
Okay.
All we actually need to do is actually to get them to put bricks on the ground and start building.
Thank you.
Are there any other further questions, members? So, Mark, I think you got away pretty easy with this. You know, we're all very polite these days. So, thank you very much. It's really good to hear about our tourism business and potentially how well it can do for the rest of this year if we get things right. And there is no doubt about it. We welcome tourists here. We don't want to see banners saying go home, stay away. They're welcome to come here, but we need to make sure that we bring them here safely. And I think that's the main thing. But in the end, really, thank you very much for coming. And again, you're welcome to stay around if you've got insomnia. So please stay if you like.
What's up next?
It's Highland Council response to COVID-19. So
okay, I may jump up then. Listen, thank you all very much. Good to speak.
Thank you very much. Members, we now move to item 5, and Liz Cowie.
Thank you, convener. I'm going to share my screen, so please bear with me. It's the first time that I've done this, so I just will take a moment to get underway. So if I can just pop this up. And are you able to see the presentation?
We can.
That's lovely. Thanks very much. Okay, so thank you, convener and members. I'd like to start by providing some context and background to the Highland Council's humanitarian response operations before moving on to talk about the Aviemore Hub and the service provided to Badenoch and Strathspey. I'll also pause after each slide to ask if members have any questions through the chair. The Scottish Government's request to set up humanitarian assistance centres came very early in the COVID process. HACs are an established part of any emergency response where coordinated support for people affected by an emergency is provided. The guidance for HACs dates from 2009 and is intended more to be a physical location for people who are in need of support to attend. However, this has had to be adapted for responding to COVID-19 as people have been required to self-isolate rather than to congregate. So the purpose is to support key groups in the community who would be vulnerable to COVID. And the main groupings are the shielding group. These are people who are advised, having been identified by doctors because their health conditions make them extremely vulnerable to COVID-19. This includes patients in 7 clinical categories of need, and initially shielding meant that people were unable to leave their homes except for medical appointments. This was for an initial period of 12 weeks. However, this has now been extended until at least the end of July, with some possibilities to leave home for exercise, provided safe practices observed on hygiene and social distancing. And others whose circumstances have changed as a result of COVID, e.g. and unable to access support, fall in income. The Highland Council Response Service is comprised of the COVID helpline, and this has been led by the service centre team, but supported by a range of council staff redeployed to support. And these have included, for example, the Eden Court staff. This provided a general helpline and a specific line for shielding patients. A peak in calls during April coincided with letters to shielding groups being issued. And then we have the 10 local community hubs that were set up. And ward managers were tasked with setting up and running hubs, liaising with key staff, through the locations, bringing staff on board to form hub management teams and support, and distribution teams, taking all the necessary steps to ensure that all Scottish guidance, advice and directives were being adhered to. Support came from fleet, environmental health, catering, health and safety teams, all to help with the initial setup. And in Badenoch and Strathspey, Highland staff have underpinned operations. A Highland-wide approach was taken, but hubs are very much tailored to the needs of the local communities they serve and take account of local geographies and local challenges. And I'll talk about the Aviemore hub shortly. The distribution hub was based in Inverness, and It coordinated food supplies across Highland, receiving food in direct from Fair Share and bagging these up into food parcels and delivering these out across Highland to the hubs. And then there was the virtual hub, and this was led by the Policy and Reform team with support from deployed council staff. And in addition to the shielding team, acted as liaison and support to helpline and hub staff, gathering information in local community groups. And I have to say at this point that we've had great support from the VHub team, particularly with regard to the shielding inquiries, which were complex and were a challenge to deal with. So I'll pause at that moment to ask if there are any questions at the present time.
Liz, we'll just take questions at the end.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the local community hubs. These are the main types of support offered, and to give some idea of the overall response, the figures provided on screen are for across the Highlands as a whole. Much of the support has been ongoing. Currently across Highland, just under 300 households are being supported with ongoing food provision, and referrals have come in from a range of sources. Self-referral via the helplines, referrals from NHS adult social care, largely these is the vulnerable adults, referrals from children and families teams, housing team, welfare support teams, and also schools. And there's currently an ongoing programme of reaching out to shielding non-responders by phone, and council staff are employed in carrying that out. We've also directly responded to referrals with the welfare support team, adult social care, and of course referrals out to community groups. So moving on to the Aviemore local hub and its operation. The hub for Badenoch and Strathspey was set up in the Aviemore Community Centre. However, as part of review, the hub has moved operations to the Kingussie Courthouse, and this happened last Thursday. Given the importance of the Aviemore School and Community Centre site, it was deemed prudent to move at this time. HighLife Highland staff volunteers hit the ground running from the very beginning and have made for a very effective hub team. It was my first experience of staff's willingness to step up to the plate from the outset, and between the leisure supervisor Kirsty McIntyre and Stephen Gibbs, the primary school facilities officer, we got up and running really quickly. Support from other Highland Council staff was invaluable in setting up. Strong relationships with partners were built on, particularly NHS colleagues in adult health and social care, and we very quickly got information from the NHS team who were able to draw on the existing vulnerable adults list to determine those who were most in need of support, and this has been a key area for our weekly operations. Some feedback from NHS colleagues from those we assisted. Clients have expressed feedback that the service has not only permitted them to enjoy a more nutritional, balanced range of foods, but in some ways helped alleviate their anxiety if they'd had to attend a shop in public. Well done, team. And what was put in place has also been described as a lifeline service by some of the clients. In terms of ongoing support, we made weekly contact with clients on the vulnerable adult list to ensure that they were aware of their delivery arrangements, and this touch base provided reassurance that support was there, and we often picked up on other issues through these weekly calls. Our delivery drivers would also come back with feedback from those they were meeting on the doorsteps. A lot of work was done by those helping with the calls referred from the main helpline, and calls back to customers were very often long and involved as the best support and help possible was offered. This was particularly true of many of the calls from those who were shielding and often involved help with how to get Scottish food parcel deliveries or sign up for online shopping slots. Prescription service was largely managed by the community volunteer teams, and Karen and the team at VABS worked with groups to ensure volunteers were PVQ checked, and this approach was strongly supported by the local GB practices. And we recently have offered water deliveries out to those in private water supplies where reserves are running low, with supplies water being supplied by Scottish Water. So there has been an excellent working relationship with the community groups from the get-go, and Karen will go into this in much more detail. And members' early word discretionary budget support for setting up the community phone lines in Badenoch and Strathspey was invaluable. We formed very good relationships with the Aviemore Food Bank, who were also based temporarily in the community centre, so we were able to liaise direct on referrals where appropriate. The development of community food share tables has been interesting, and it was good to be able to make the link with the food bank in getting some of their supplies out to them, particularly to Granton, where this initiative really took off. So the Aviemore complex has been really busy. It was also a key worker childcare hub and has also been running the Keeping in Touch sessions for vulnerable children and young people. Weekly ELG meetings for INBS have been held on a Monday and have played a key role in sharing information and understanding partners' roles and their challenges. And this was extended to CNPA, who have been participating fully. As already mentioned, we were able to draw quickly on the established community partnership relationships, and this has made working with our partner agencies from the NHS through to the police really seamless. So who have we been supporting? This data was taken as a snapshot as at the 28th of May, so this will give members an idea of some of the numbers of individuals supported. And this is in addition to the services being provided by community groups across the ward. It's worth noting that we've been supporting up to 25 households on a weekly basis, and this has been ongoing support. In terms of shielding groups, we've helped arrange food parcels for 39 folk. 3 individuals were helped with food whilst waiting for their Scottish Government parcels to start. And the other ranges of supports we helped with was directing for shopping, prescriptions, safe social contact, things like that. Last week, we delivered food out to 23 households in the non-shielding group. And over the last couple of weeks, we've worked with both NHS Adult Social Care Team and the Children and Families colleagues to put in place a range of other supports for these households and individuals. And as a result, this week, we will be down to 1 to 2 households with food support. However, we are geared up for any impacts of Test and Protect. And one aspect that the stats don't really detail is just how much time was spent with individual customers, especially on IT issues, online ordering, getting supermarket slots, and again, great work done by Highland volunteers. And in particular, Fraser Morrison, our YDO, our Youth Development Officer, who covered much of the phone work early on and got very adept at helping our elderly clients with using mobile phones, some of whom had never had to use them before. And often these calls back involved providing reassurance and calling back yet again to make sure the situations were sorted out. And again, the support from the virtual hub was particularly invaluable. Great support which continues, and again around the shielding side of things. Communities are continuing to provide support across BNS, and again, Karen will provide more information on this. So moving on to the key learning. We've proved that we have the ability to respond quickly and put the core emergency response in place and are now adapting to longer term response. The partnership working has been very positive. We've all had to adapt to working in different ways. And one of the biggest positives has been the commitment and dedication from staff in the volunteering aspect. And in terms of staff and community, we've had really positive feedback from partners and community partners. And the strong local knowledge of the High Life Highlands hub staff has helped inform responses, and this has proved invaluable as well. In terms of challenges, as you would expect, members, we've had to deal with a really wide geographic area and did end up with an inquiry out of Brigabrown, which caused us some investigation to find out which side of the border that inquiry landed on, but we did manage to help the person at the end of the day. We've had to deal with the pace of change in responding to daily updates and government requirements, coordination of response, avoiding duplication and identifying gaps. And of course, there's been the funding of the initial response. And dependencies. This has been finely balanced for a period, but working with partners in the community, we've found solutions for those who need them. And looking at the opportunities, it's just amazing how communities have responded and what strength and innovation there is at a grassroots level. We've not only seen new alliances between communities, but new volunteers have come on board. One community council chair said to me when asked why the community council had not been more to the fore, that if the old guard kept doing what it had always done, nothing would change. And he was right, it has changed. And that includes how communities have embraced online communications, for example. So now is the time to build on this new community confidence. So in terms of next step, we continue to provide ongoing shielding support. We will provide support for those who are requiring to isolate from Test and Protect. We will provide support for individuals who have become vulnerable as a result of COVID. There will be the managed withdrawal of ward management team with other supports in place. and the council decision to review all COVID projects by the end of July. And there is the internal review agreed at council to determine whether continued support beyond the end of July is in place. At present, there's no confirmation of additional funding to support. However, this is being explored with the Scottish Government. So turning quickly to the council working with communities, Karen will give an overview of the community and third sector response, but looking at how the council has worked with communities across Highland, there has been an impressive community response. And a large people have come forward to volunteer, be it to volunteer directly for local groups or to volunteer for council support staffs. And we've seen this in Aviemore with the early learning and childcare hubs that have been put in place and the key worker hubs. And funding to support community efforts is a consideration. In terms of Badenoch and Strathspey, again, Karen will go into this in more detail, but the core aspect of the local community hub operations has been to work with local groups. And in Badenoch and Strathspey in particular, we've had referrals for shopping, collection of shopping, prescriptions, other things simple as putting the bins out, and these have been referred on to and picked up by the community groups. And in addition to the groups that are listed there who registered with Highland Council, a number of local groups have been working with communities, and this has been coordinated through VABs. So in terms for funding for community support, as at the 9th of June, you can see over 2.2 million has been distributed to community groups in Highland, including through our own ward discretionary funds. And the main funds that have been to the fore are listed in the slide in front of you. In terms of local funding for community support, across the board to date, there have been 10 separate awards. Looking at the ward discretionary fund, in addition to the COVID specific awards of just under £2,000, there was early support for the community phone lines, which we mentioned already. Karen can maybe touch on this. There were no HTSI Wellbeing Fund awards in Badenoch and Strathspey, but we had response recovery and resilience funding, £4,000 for the Badenoch and Strathspey Community Transport Company. The SSEN Resilient Communities Fund brought funding to Kingussie and to Cromdale. And again, Karen will talk about the Supporting Community Fund that VABs were very successful in securing. And the Wellbeing Fund, the INBS Citizens Advice Fund application brought £11,728 there. So a good amount of support and funding coming into the ward. So I'll just finish on the business grant support, and Mark touched on the grant support, and Mark has been taking part in the weekly business briefings and discussions, and that's been hugely useful for us all. So looking at the number of grants for Badenoch and Strathspey in terms of small business grants, 377, self-catering grants, 245, NDR property grants, 622. I have to say that there are no bed and breakfast hardship grants awarded in Highland to my knowledge. That's the position when the statistics were provided. Newly self-employed grants, 24. So all business grants, 646. So I would move to questions from members before I pass over to Karen, and thank you very much for your patience whilst going through the presentation.
Liz, would it be possible for you to share that presentation with members?
Absolutely, I'll provide that for members. Yes, I'll provide that for members immediately after the committee.
Okay, and can you take down your slides, please?
Thank you.
And I have Councillor Bruce.
Better with the microphone on. Yes, I just want to ask, are those grants non-returnable or are they loans?
I am not actually up to speed on that, John, so I will take that question and I will get back to you unless either Kate or Alison would like to chip into that one. It is my understanding that they're grants and not loans, so I will check that and get the facts on that for you.
Thank you.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Liz, for that detailed presentation. That's really helpful, and and a great job done by all. A couple of things that interested me was particularly you mentioned the young chap, I think you mentioned his name was Fraser, with the telephone line and helping some of our community. I think that is an absolutely fantastic initiative, and I'm just wondering if we should be cognizant of that, particularly going forward, because we have quite a lot of older and less technical people in that category in the future, and if it's something we could capitalise on, I just think it was a great register. And it's also the other point I had from your presentation. It highlights the partnership working with High Life Highland and getting, hitting the ground running. I think that was a great thing. So thank you.
And touching base on the phone support, Muriel, I don't think anyone was more surprised than our team, and in particular Fraser, at the expertise he developed in dealing with particularly elderly folk. And I have to thank Karen here for the tip to use AbilityNet, and that helped enormously in being able to pass on some of the really complex issues that we were struggling to help to resolve for our customers and clients. So AbilityNet did step into the breach for us on more than one occasion. And I think I'm hoping that Karen will touch base on how we can maybe look at how we're going to put supports in with phone systems moving forward, because that's certainly a number of the things that I've talked about that's been mirrored in the community, and Karen will expand on those. But certainly the ranges of supports that are being looked at, I would imagine that these kind of supports are going to be investigated further, Muriel, because they've provided hugely useful and important services to people in our communities.
We'll get Fraser's telephone number for you, Muriel, so that you can help out with your IT. So there don't appear to be any other questions for Liz. So Karen, thank you for attending today. It's really appreciated. And it's over to you now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Lobban, and thanks very much for inviting me to be here and to share with you the most fantastic work that our community volunteers have been putting in over the last 4 months. It's been referred to several times through the presentations, through questions, and I'm sure you're aware of it because of those of you who have been out and about in the communities, but it has been an overwhelming response, overwhelmingly positive, and I think knowing the Badenoch and Strathspey communities as we do, we would expect no more or less than that. Sorry, can you see that now? Let me. Are you seeing that? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so as with many of yourselves and Highland Council and other agencies, a lot of our usual work in VABS has been put on the back burner for the last 4 months, starting to come back now, starting to get requests for constitutions and other kinds of funding, non-COVID related, but certainly since March 16th, when we left our office and started home working, VABS has been pretty much solely concentrated on helping the communities develop their response to COVID throughout Badenoch and Strathspey. There's been a whole lot that's been happening, but what I'm going to do is just give you the overview of the key activities and just pay tribute, as I say, to the communities, the groups that have formed, the community response teams, and the volunteers, the huge number of volunteers. But I'd also like to say, just at this juncture, a real appreciation of the partnership working that's gone on. You'll be aware that the Badenoch Strathspey Community Partnership, the formal partnership, has not met since I think it's end of January. But the partnership working that has gone on has been phenomenal, and Highland Council have played a very key part through working with Liz and elected members and other officers of Highland Council, and they've played a very crucial part in helping us to put all this together. So I would just like to pay tribute to them and say thank you for their help there. those of you who have been on social media and stuff, whether for good or for ill, you'll be aware that there are many acts of local kindness and support that have been going on kind of off-piste, as it were. But what I'm just going to run through with you just now is to give you an overview of the key activities that have been going on in the communities in response to COVID-19. The first three that are listed there, that is the community response teams, the phone line application and the toolkit. These all happened pretty quickly within March, these first three items. Pretty much during the first 2 weeks of lockdown, we were aware of what needed to be put in place and working around the clock to get these things working. So the community response teams, covering all of Badenoch and Strathspey, all 12 of our 12 community council areas. There are 9 teams that are operating because some of the teams have doubled up. So, for example, Cromdale has a response team together with Granton, Kincraig and Kennusy work together, and Newton Moor and Lagan work together. Dalwhinnie's struck out on its own, but it's doing great things. But there are 9 community response teams. And within that, there have been well over 800 volunteers that have been registered on our system across the Strath, people who are directly involved in the teams, doing other bits of local work. And some of them, as you'll know from sort of news reports, media reports, that there are huge numbers of volunteers that have come forward right across the country, and unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, not all of them have been brought into use. So we've been trying to help in terms of having an A team and then a second team to provide support should the numbers of the first lots of volunteers have gone down and become sick. Happily, that didn't happen. As we know, Badenoch and Strathspey has not been too badly affected by the virus, and so we've been working to try and keep all those volunteers engaged throughout the period, as well as safe. Very important. Liz has mentioned, and you will be aware as elected members, about the support that was provided through the ward discretionary budget funding very early on. And I thank you for that. That came in almost within 24, 48 hours of us going into lockdown. So these community phone lines, each one is assigned to the community response teams. They're app-based, so it's a one-off initial cost. And all of those phone lines have gone in and have been advertised widely on websites through Highland Council own central system as well, the central helpline, and they've worked really, really effectively. Once we got round, talk about technical issues, once we got around people working out how to work them on their phone through the app. The third thing on the list there, the community response team toolkit. This was something that VAVS put together very, very quickly, because again, it was just trying to absorb all of the guidance that was coming in from a lot of different places and get it into one place for the volunteers and the community groups to provide health and safety for the volunteers going out in what was a very, the virus was very unknown in the early stages in terms of how significant it was in our communities. And so there was a really great focus there for keeping people safe as they were going out and responding to the needs of people in the community. So not only the volunteers, but also the people that they were serving, the users. So this community toolkit has lots of templates and guidance, processes and spreadsheets to record lots of different things that were being offered. So most of the help through the phone lines was, as been alluded to, was around getting food shopping for people, and also helping people get medicines through prescriptions and so on, and some dog walking, but those were the key things that were going on. The phone lines are still in place. They will continue to be in place for a while longer yet, and are still in use. There has been a decrease in the amount of use of the phone lines in many of the communities, not all. Granton is still receiving lots of phone calls every day. I don't think that's because the amount of support needed has dropped off, but just that people have been making their own connections. So we've been trying to buddy up people with users or people in need, so that there is a familiarity there for some of the vulnerable in our community, so they know who is going to come to their door and deliver their shopping or collect their prescriptions. So in some senses, the phone lines have been reduced in their use from that point of view. But as I say, the amount of volunteering and support for people in the community is still at a very high level. So the community food tables is next on the list, and these are operating in Granton, Aviemore and Kingussie. And I just thought I'd give you a bit of light relief, put a couple of visuals up there. So you can see there that there's a huge range of goods that are available through these support tables, and they do serve the communities around. So they're obviously in the main population areas, but they are accessed by people out with the Kingussie, Granton, Aviemore area as well. So they are manned by volunteers exclusively who have rotas, and they try to open. The poster I've put there for you shows the hours, and all of them are very similar. So the one in Granton is in the YMCA. The one in Aviemore was in the British Legion and has just now moved back to the Church Hall as the Legion is opening again. And the one in Kingussie is outside the Caberfay bookshop. You'll see that they supply lots of food, toiletries, meals. You can see on the right-hand side, top right picture there, the community fridges. So people have been using food from these food tables. Volunteers have been cooking meals with some of the leftover veg and various bits and pieces to provide nutritious meals, which have been boxed up, put in fridges, and people can go and take ready meals then for use if they wish. So the key thing, all of this work has been done in collaboration with the food bank. So the food bank obviously services specific registered users, and the hub, as we've heard from Liz, has serviced others. So the community is for people who can just come along. They are asked no questions. Whatever they want to take, they can. And it is hopefully that has reduced the stigma there. The food and all of the provision for these tables comes from supermarkets. So the volunteers will go to our local supermarkets, Co-op, Tesco and Aldi, who have been fantastic, very, very cooperative in getting food out on a daily basis at 8 o'clock at night out to these food tables for use on them the following day. Also, we've had donations, cash donations, which have helped to fund additional items that haven't been forthcoming from the supermarkets. And also the Supporting Communities Fund, which I'll talk about in a moment, has also worked with this. And we are still servicing over 100 visits a week to these food tables from people. So that's quite substantial. And there's a real question to be asked here about how we reduce the reliance, how we reduce reliance on these in the communities. But at the moment, there is still obviously a need there. So as we go forward, Mark alluded to further job losses, sadly, because of our reliance on the tourism industry. So there is the real possibility that these community food tables will be with us for a while longer yet, I think. Okay, so coming back, the next thing on the slide is around the community help funds. And these have been set up specifically for people who are experiencing financial hardship. So these are for individuals, and we have set them up in Granton and Aviemore, Nethy and Boat of Garton. I suspect it is happening as well in some of the other communities, but VABS has not been involved in any of those to date. So these basically are very simple. They're held by a local community group, the funds. We invite donations from individuals and then put money out through a confidential, quite convoluted system, but it's basically trying to encourage people who are experiencing financial hardship to come forward, or if you know of somebody, then then financial help is available. Small amounts, you know, it might be 50, it might be £100. We've bought things like, I know of things that have electricity top-ups or fuel top-ups for oil or something. We bought, one of the communities bought a fire guard because people couldn't afford to get one of those. So these are funds that will sit going forward, I suspect, for quite a long time yet, well into next year, possibly even beyond that, for people who are experiencing hardship as a fallout of this particular, of the pandemic. The Stay Active packs, some of you, I'm sure you haven't received them, but this was another initiative that we took on fairly early on to try to look at mental and physical well-being in our communities. So these Stay Active packs were, as it says, they're distributed to over 600 vulnerable people in Badenoch and Strathspey, adult males and females, secondary and primary pupils, and the under sevens. And this was to support health, to help people keep active and stimulated. And this was a joint project that was started up looking at trying to get various things into people's homes, people who are vulnerable, to help them to stay active. And then the Green Health Partnership repurposed some of their leader money, and we were able to get these out to the people at the same time. So you can see there, bottom left, a large number of bags, as I said, 600. We were very grateful to the Park Authority for lending their premises to help pack them. They also received huge deliveries from Amazon and the Works and various other people to make up the packs. So VABS was involved there, the Park Authority and the Green Health Partnership, and we worked together with key people within the schools, so the senior management team and head teachers of the primary and secondary schools, the community health team, so Gillian Davidson in NHS in Aviemore, so they had lists of people together with the doctors who provided the list of people who are vulnerable, and they went out to them. So all of these bags went out, and you'll see examples of one of the things that went in the bags up at the top there, and one of the ladies in Aviemore. And we had lots of nice messages back from people saying that they were very grateful for those. So I hope they went some way. One of the problems we had were there was a lot of chat on social media about people saying, why didn't my child get one, which you're always going to get. And that's quite a difficult message, because you obviously don't say they only went to people who we think are in difficulty and vulnerable. So we didn't give that message out, but it was one of the things that we had to navigate as to who got them and why. Okay, and then at the bottom there we have the Supporting Communities Fund. So this is money that has come out from Scottish Government and been organised through Highlands and Islands Enterprise. And as Liz mentioned in one of her slides, there is a significant amount of money from this fund that's come out throughout Highland. So this fund is targeted at community anchor organisations, and across all of the other parts of Highland, these have gone to specific organisations. But in Badenoch and Strathspey, we had a good chat through with High and agreed that VABS would be in a good place to distribute the monies across all of the area. And we are doing that at the moment. So 123,000, the date for that is to be spent by 1st of September, although I imagine there will be some leeway in that. And these funds we've just put our first claim into them. So we've spent about 30,000 of that going forward since, when was it? I think it was end of April. And this has gone out to community food tables and the kitchens, to help them with equipment to do that particular piece of work, helping people to stay in communication with each other, funding for hardware and software, Zoom licenses, etc., for various groups and individuals. Volunteer expenses, because as we live in a rural area, getting food out and helping people with the response teams has involved a cost to some of the volunteers, and we've supported that. AbilityNet, again, has been mentioned, so that we have funded AbilityNet to put support in place for the next few months for individuals who are experiencing difficulty with getting online with any equipment they have. And so there are volunteers who are now in place and have started work already to help and support those people who are in need. We've been working with the transport company, and the Sport and Communities Fund has helped them with Perspex screens so that they can repurpose their vehicles. The car has a Perspex screen in now so that you can get a passenger in the back, whereas you couldn't before with the 2-metre ruling. And the minibuses can now take 2 people in the back of the minibus because of this kind of intervention. Sanitizer and other equipment, plus printing, and also we've been working with the FAISH and the music fraternity across the Strath to try and help people with their mental health to continue to play music or learn a musical instrument. So that's pretty much there. Positive impacts are abounding, but I think we've ensured that our vulnerable people have been kept safe. I think there is a very real level of confidence in the community that people have had access to the support that they've needed at the time they've needed it. The volunteers have worked really hard to do that. The community partnership, I think, has been really strengthened between the public, private and third sector. Our numbers, as I say, have increased in the Strath significantly. Now need to hold on to those, which I'll talk about in a minute. It has encouraged innovative thinking, working with cash, was one of the early problems that we had to deal with, and so trying to find workarounds for that, came up with some very novel ways, but also making sure that the hard to reach, the people who either wouldn't want to come forward for help or just didn't know how to access it, there were lots of different ways to help sort that out. I think there has been support for mental and physical well-being. That needs to go on. We talked about it early on when Paul was giving his report back, that people are still very vulnerable in all across our groups, and we're looking to see how we can continue support there. It has certainly reconnected our streets and neighbourhoods, not least through the clapping on a Thursday night for the NHS, but also in people learning who their neighbours were and who they could get support from. And it's helped people to stay in touch, enabled them to stay in touch with their family and friends and community. So lots of positives there. Going forward now, we're starting to look at recovery. Our focus is turning towards obviously what Mark is talking about, so having visitors and people coming back into our communities, but also the very fundamental structure of our communities through our groups needs to be focused on now. So we are starting to work in VABs, particularly on support for the town teams and the village halls. The village halls forum is going to go ahead towards the end of July. And we will be working with the village halls on their risk assessments and helping them with guidance to see, because there doesn't seem to be very much out there at the moment for village halls in Scotland anyway. So we will be working with we have had a Badenoch and Strathspey forum going for quite a few years now. So we'll be using that same approach to help them come together and support each other to get open as much as they can. And the same will apply with community councils, working with Liz to see where we can provide additional support there. Also working on our town teams, which many of the elected members will be familiar with. So these have been going for quite a few years now. So all of our communities have teams in them, Team Cromdale, Team Newtonmore, Team Aviemore. And these are really a collection of all the key organisations in the community, which provide a holistic overview of all the activity that's happening there. And we will be using those town teams to take recovery forward with an overview. Part of that, we will obviously be including the community response teams and looking at how we can retain the volunteers. So this 800 number, it's really crucial. Some of them will go back to work and we may lose them on a day-to-day basis, but it's looking to see how we can re-energise our community groups with additional volunteers going forward, which I think is really important not to waste that opportunity. Social enterprises, so these are our community groups that are running activities or owning buildings, assets, and looking to see at how they can mitigate the risks. Many of them obviously have lost trading income, so we need to look at how that can be restored. And restarting our clubs and societies. So obviously the village halls are key to that in many cases, but these are the very basic fabric allowing people to socialise, carry out hobbies, and enhance their well-being. So they're all key things that we're looking at. New volunteers, as I say, are also an area that we are particularly focused on, how we can retain some of these 800 new volunteers, and continuing our strong community partnership working. I think that has come to the fore, that we all work very well together, and that's something that we should look to continue. So my final slide here is just really bits of learning. So I think it has helped to reinforce that the communities are able to respond quicker, they become nimble, and they can target local conditions often better than the larger agencies, because they're there on the ground, and they can provide vital intel to the agencies for things that are happening. And also that it's really important to get our communications on a regular and timely basis, because they can help things to become more disruptive and complex if they're left to fester. As has been said, there's a lot of online meeting going on now, so Zoom is becoming one of the go-to. We've issued guidance on Zoom, particularly because community groups have seem to find that a good platform going forward. So we've issued very clear guidance and done some training with groups in order to help them to stay safe on that particular platform. But it's looking to see how we can continue to be carbon clever, to continue to use those methods where we can. And I hope that it's shown that the communities can make the right decisions, take on complex issues when needed. I think it's just fantastic how these volunteers have been working, and I hope that's given you an overview anyway of what we've been doing. Thank you, Councillor Robin.
Karen, thank you very much for that. Very comprehensive report. Someone's got their mic not on mute. Thank you. No, Karen, I'll just go over that again. Thanks very much for that really comprehensive report. It's very much appreciated. But it really does go to show what great communities we have in Badenoch and Strathspey, and that we're really well placed to cope with any spike in the virus that happens in the future, or even if we get a second wave. But I think we need to appreciate that we really do have an advantage over other areas of Highland. We've got VABs and no one else has, and I think that's really one of the reasons why we've been so successful here during this pandemic. So I now have Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chair, and you've obviously been reading my notes here. This allows us an opportunity, Karen, to thank you and the team for absolutely everything you've done and creatively done. And I thoroughly believe that one of the reasons we've done so well in our community across BNS is because you hit the ground running, and those first 2 weeks it was phenomenal. The number of people that we would just, there was emails going to you, this is X, Y, and Z, and it's just phenomenal. A couple of things from your presentation, which was really comprehensive, is great. I think as members we need to be cognizant of the fact that there is a continued demand and possibly will be a continued increase on the need for the food tables. And I think we need to think long and hard on how we're going to manage and support that. It's a wonderful thing, but I worry that we may not be supporting this in the autumn and the winter when it's needed. So that was just one thing that was going on. And the other thing is you've given us food for thought, and it's something that we've mentioned and it's been at the back of my mind. We've had some brilliant volunteers, some will go back, but some of our volunteers are probably worked particularly well because the weather wasn't too bad during the height of this, but we have got a very long winter here. So how do we work around, how do we create a winter resilience should we need it? Because some of these things if we get local spikes or we get a bad flu, and the medics are currently advising they're really worried about flu this winter, and they're not sure. They're doing a lot of modelling in that. So I think as a group we need to think about sort of the winter model to do that. But I'll stop there, but sincere, heartfelt thanks. Thank you.
Councillor Hadley.
Hi, sorry, it was just to absolutely and utterly reiterate what Muriel has said about what a fantastic response and a wonderful, and I hate to say this and use this word in description of you, a resource you've been, but in reality, you've been contributing to the community that you're within, and I would like to offer my thanks alongside Muriel's. Everything she said was very valid. And it was just one smaller point with regard to, you've picked up on so much within there, and absolutely the positive impact on community and connectedness within that community has been unbelievable and astounding. And we're talking now about recovery and how we keep the volunteers that have come forward. But in that, I do wonder, and again, this is linking back to what Mark had said with regard to people that will become, they will be entering difficulties as it appears that everybody else is entering the recovery phase. And it was about managing people's understanding of what is still available so they don't feel that they're being left behind, that everybody else is beginning to not need these things, whereas in their reality, they are suddenly becoming in need of it. And it was just to say that it would be really good to have awareness of those people that feel that they would be out of sync with the rest of the world when it comes to their need. And that was all really. Thank you.
Councillor Bruce.
I just like to support everything that's been said about Karen and VABS. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's been done so quietly and seamlessly that I think it's a great credit to all concerned. And well done, Karen.
There must be any questions. No, Karen, just again, thank you very much for taking the time to come today. It's really appreciated. And I'm sure that we'll be badgering you with many questions in the future as we progress through what we hope is the beginning of the end of this pandemic. But I do believe it will be a long time coming. So again, on behalf of the members, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And yes, I look forward to working on the next phase. That'll be very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Members, we now move to item 6, which is the minutes of the meeting. These have already been pre-approved, so I don't think we need to do anything other than note them for noting. Thank you, members. That ends our meeting today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.